So One Piece chapter 957 just came out, and it was of course an absolute game changer of a chapter. It was a chapter that single-handedly revamped our entire understanding of the lore of One Piece as we knew it so far. And of course there are about a million question marks and mysteries that came out of this chapter, but the main one that I want to focus on in depth in this video is regarding the mystery of the island of God Valley. An island that I think has already placed itself right up there alongside Raftel as among the most mysterious, if not the most mysterious location in all of One Piece. Now, while we don't have a lot of information on this island that was just revealed to us this last chapter, I do think that we do have enough little hanging threads and ideas in the series so far that we can start at least peeling back some of the ideas around it potentially and making some educated speculation. So I'll cut right to it. The main two things I want to talk about in this video are firstly, who lived there? Because I don't think that's a conversation that I think is coming up as much as I think it should. And then secondly, what does the name actually mean, or what meaning can we draw out of this name, Island of God Valley? So firstly, regarding who lives there, I think a lot of people have assumed either that the Celestial Dragons themselves live there, or that it was an uninhabited island. But the Celestial Dragons living there doesn't seem to make that much sense to me, just because based on what we learned from Doflamingo, it sounds like most of them migrated to Marijoa after the world government was formed. And just going along with the general theme of the Celestial Dragons, there doesn't seem to be any reason why they would want to live on Earth, essentially, along with all the commoners. So why would they reside in an island on the Blue Sea when they could be up in Marijoa? It doesn't seem to make sense to me for that to be a permanent sort of location for them. It might be a regular destination for them, but again, I don't understand the reason for that. I don't see why it would be an uninhabited island either, because an island like that, there do seem to be, at least to me, two main possibilities for races that could actually have inhabited that island. So firstly, this one is a little weaker of a possibility, but Big Mom did mention the king, but there are three races missing from her country. And we know that one is the giant, so we can cross that off, but one she implied is King's race, and it might seem like she either implied that King's race is this next race that she was talking about, or another race entirely. She mentioned that there is a race that was lost to the mists of time. Now, reading that chapter again, and I read the Viz translation and the Gemini's box, it's hard to tell if she's saying that King's race was the one that was lost to the mists of time. And it's hard to tell exactly what King's race is until it's confirmed. It does seem like he might be one of the Sky people, so either Shandian, Birkin, or Skypian. But his wing size does not seem to match any of those. In fact, his wing size seems to be more similar to Hitetsu, so it's hard to tell if he is one of the Sky Islanders. And even if he is, I don't think that Big Mom would believe that that's one of the races lost to the mists of time, because the Sky Island concept just does seem to be more generally well known in the New World. Like, Kaido visits there frequently. Everybody has seen Urauch at this point. Urauch has even been to Big Mom's territory, so it's hard to imagine her being that excited over a Sky Islander. And then at the same time, if King is in fact not a Sky Islander, but a separate race similar to the same race as Hitetsu, then it's hard to believe that this would be the race that was lost to the mists of time as well, because again, we see multiple examples of this race in Wano, like King and Hitetsu. So to me, it's very possible that if there was a race that was lost to the mists of time, then perhaps this was a race that resided on the island of God Valley, because going back to Sengoku's description of it, it does sound like an island that essentially, the description sounds like an island that was essentially erased from history. That's what the world government attempted to do to it. They attempted to cut it out from history and pretend it never existed, meaning that any race that would have existed there would have been wiped out and essentially become lost to the mists of time, as Big Mom said. Now that is a little hard to wrap around, because it doesn't seem as though that's concretely what Big Mom is saying, whether or not there is some extra third race that was lost to the mists of time, or whether it's King's race that she's referring to specifically. But really, the more interesting idea that I want to bring around is a race that I think we could very, very fairly speculate originated from the island of God Valley. Because up till now, there has been a race of people that has absolutely, I suppose, flummoxed me, in that I have no idea why we've never heard of them before, why we've never seen them mentioned, or had them mentioned at any other point in the series, had them even been acknowledged as to their existence, and the power that they hold is so extraordinarily rare that it just makes no sense why this would be, and that is of course the Three-Eyed Race. Why is it that there is this race that has the ability to read the poneglyphs when they fully mature and open up their third eye. They have an ability that is easily one of the most valuable, one of the single most important abilities in the entire universe of One Piece, and we have never seen them mentioned. As far as most people seem to know, Nico Robin is the only person in the world who can read the poneglyphs, so how is it that there is this entire race out there who is able to do the same thing and has not been mentioned or seen or heard of or acknowledged so far at any point in the story? That's why Pudding has always seemed like such an anomaly to me. It makes no sense. My assumption was always that whatever race she comes from, this Three-Eyed Race, they must be one of the rarest, most mysterious, most hidden races in the entire world of One Piece. They must be outside of the knowledge of most people in the world, and I mean like most people in the world. Even the world government must somewhat believe that they don't hardly exist, because they seem to believe that Nico Robin was the only one who could reawaken the ancient weapons by reading the poneglyphs. So if that's the case, where would Pudding have originated from? Where would this Three-Eyed Race have originated from? What island would they be found at? And then we found out this chapter about the island of God Valley, an island where supposedly there was some significant conflict, where the Celestial Dragons were at, where the Rocks Pirates were at, where Roger was at, where Garp was at. There was this significant conflict, and who knows over what, but it makes sense that there would be some sort of great secret there, a great mystery, or a great something of significance there, and to me, a race of people that could read the poneglyphs might very well be at the heart of it. Because if we think back, we do have a sort of precedent for this sort of thing, of the world government really wanting to erase something from history, pretend an island doesn't exist, just wipe it off the board, pretend, make it disappear, essentially, and that is Ohara. And why did they get rid of Ohara? Because Ohara was an island where the people could read the poneglyphs, and the Three-Eyed Race is an entire tribe of people that can do the very same thing. So why is it that the world government wanted to essentially delete, basically vanish this island of God Valley from history? One, of course, I suppose from the events that occurred there, but it could be something a little more. In retrospect, the world government may have realized that there is an entire race of people that can read the poneglyphs and wanted to make that disappear from history. And so why is it that Big Mom has her hands on Pudding? Well, because Big Mom was there for that conflict. She would have been made aware of the existence of this race that could read the poneglyphs. So whether she was able to track down the last remaining survivor, and I suppose take advantage of him, or whatever she's done to, get her hands on Pudding, she would have had knowledge of the race if she was at the island of God Valley when this conflict occurred. So, to me, the island of God Valley at the moment seems like the number one candidate for housing this race of three-eyed people. And whether it's actually been made to disappear or not, who knows, but it does seem like a very strong possibility. And I think that is the theory that I would like to put forward in this video so far, that the island of God Valley was where the three-eyed people originated from. Now, moving on from there, I want to get into something a little more thematic, which is the idea that, what does the word God Valley mean in the context of the story of One Piece and the Will of D and everything that we know about it so far. So, firstly, of course, One Piece, the idea of this theme of the natural enemies of the gods, that has been a prominent idea in the story so far. You can see it from the very beginning of the... I've made videos on videos of this so far. I strongly recommend checking out my video on the natural enemy of gods, or my Dressrosa arc analysis, at least the end part of it, if you get the chance to get more on this. But generally speaking, Oda has been communicating from the start of the story that being a pirate, even from Luffy's conversation with Wapol, means that you don't bow to anyone, even God. Luffy has literally gone up to God's land and defeated God. Luffy is literally God's natural enemy. That little symbolism was planted there with his rubber power interacting with Enno's lightning power. Law and Corazon, they literally discuss how the celestial dragons in the story are meant to represent gods, and how the D-Tribe and those who are part of the D-Tribe are essentially the natural enemies of gods. That's a theme that runs rampant throughout the story, and of course the celestial dragons are strongly built up. The idea around them is that they are essentially, believe themselves at least, to be the gods of the world. They rule from literally the holy land of Marijoa, ruling everyone from up above at the top of the world. They believe that they're divine, they consider themselves to be above mortals, they don't consider themselves to even be human anymore. Everything about them screams that they are meant to represent the gods of the world, and again, that is what Corazon directly talks to Law about, referencing to the Celestial Dragons as essentially being the gods of this world, back in that alley conversation they had when Law was a kid. So that's all very clear, and Luffy is of course meant to be this sort of ultimate inheritor of the Will of D, and the Will of D does seem to be essentially the end of the Celestial Dragons, or the end of the Reign of the Gods. Right, so those are ideas that have been communicated throughout the series plenty of times. So what's interesting to me is that this island of God Valley and the history of rocks that led up to it, at least as far as we can tell so far, and the name of God Valley to me sounds like, essentially, like what would it sound like to you if it's just thinking about that name? To me, it invokes the sense of the death of the gods, God Valley. The same way that God Summit, or God Peak, or God Pinnacle, or God Mountain, that sounds like, a Mount Olympus, Margeau-esque, like the royal abode of the gods or something along those lines. God Valley to me sounds like death, or end, or fall of the gods. That's what that island's name invokes to me. And if we think about who Rox is, he is of course someone who carries the Will of D. He is of course someone who seemed to have learned something about history that drove him to want to that strongly drove him to want to destroy the Celestial Dragons, and that was his ultimate goal. Of course, he wanted to be the king of the world, but he wanted to really take down the Celestial Dragons as well. So to me, it seems as though this fated encounter of essentially him finally getting to confront the Celestial Dragons at God Valley was possibly, we know so little about it so far, but to me the sense is that this Island of God Valley incident could very well have been that culmination of the Will of D, where a carrier of the Will of D finally took down the Celestial Dragons and wiped them out, and this would have literally been the Valley of the Gods, and it would have been the end of Celestial Dragons and the dawn of a new age of rocks, I suppose. But there was this twist of fate where another carrier of the Will of D, Gold Roger, stepped up and stopped him. And we don't really fully understand why right now, because of course we're not supposed to, but maybe it's because Roger saw that what rocks would have brought to the world would have been worse than the Celestial Dragons. Maybe it's because Roger didn't even understand anything about what was going on, and he had some more personal storyline that we actually don't really know about yet, because we haven't delved into that section of history yet. But the point is that there was this sort of crossroads of fate, and in the series this idea of crossroads of fate has been reiterated multiple times. You can see it throughout the story. So it sounds to me like this was one of those ultimate crossroads of fate where this island very well should have been the God's Valley, where this inheritor of the Will of D finally did enact their will as the natural enemy of the gods and end their reign. But there was this sort of twist of fate where another carrier of the Will of D came in and stopped them, and we really don't understand why that is, because we know that the Celestial Dragons have to go down at some point, and that is what the Will of D is leading up to. And we know that Roger himself, the legacy he left behind, everything based on Whitebeard's speech, everything that he implied from there, it does sound like Roger's final will, leaving the One Piece and everything like that. It's tied to the end of the Celestial Dragon's reign and the culmination of the Will of D, so why is it that he stopped Rox there? So basically what I'm getting at is that this island, at least the way it's named, sounds to me like it should have been literally God's Valley. It should have been the end of the gods. But something happened, and that wasn't the case in the end. And so this other side won out, and the gods got to survive. And then they went on to erase this island of God's Valley from history, and they continued to rule on. But it's just interesting to me that Oda chose to name it that way, because it carries such an interesting implication to it. What's interesting is that there's another sort of crossroads of fate that happened somewhat later. I think most people have drawn sort of the parallels between Blackbeard and Rox. If you haven't at this point, then one of the things I'd point out is that, as I've read, Blackbeard's ship now is literally called the Saber of Zebek, and Rox's full name is Rox D. Zebek. So Blackbeard is, at least in some sense, I'm not going to say he's Rox's son or anything, we have no idea about all that sense, but in a way it does seem like he seems to be some sort of symbolic modern parallel to Rox, maybe some sort of inheritor of will, something along those lines. We don't fully know yet, but there is some sort of connection there. And of course, one of the main, new era crossroads of fate that we saw was that the Blackbeard crew commented on themselves was basically when Blackbeard ran into Roger's son, Ace. and the events that spilled out from that really dictated the shape of the world as it is today. And again, everything seems to be leading towards now, another point in time where the Celestial Dragon's rule might come down. So, I mean, there's just a lot of ideas that are going on here about, like, what was the meaning of Roger and Rox's encounter at God Valley, where the fate of the Celestial Dragons was decided, and where it did seem like their reign should finally have come to an end, but Roger himself stopped it. And now we're leading up to a point in the story where the reign of the Celestial Dragons definitely should end, but this time, what is the conflict that's gonna finally decide that? You know what I mean? So it's just there's so many threads coming out of that I don't fully understand yet, and we can't fully understand yet. But there is something symbolic about that name, Island of God Valley, that we don't fully understand yet, or why it was not yet the right time or place for the God's reign to end. So, if you enjoyed this video, then definitely, like, share, and subscribe. You can join my Patreon to listen to my full thoughts on the chapter, because there was a lot more that went on besides this. Definitely look out for my Blackbeard character analysis coming out on Monday. I definitely think it might shed. In retrospect, having already scripted and mostly edited the video at this point, I love the timing of the video because I think it's coming out at a time where a lot of what I'm saying there could help shed some light on the parallels that we could potentially see between Roger and Rox, or at least speculate on, and the parallels that we definitely see, or the ideas that we definitely see being portrayed through Blackbeard and Luffy today. And lastly, I have my Wano arc complete arc analysis running around through YouTube right now, so definitely check that out if you get the chance.